Welcome everyone to a video which really stretched the limits of what remains of my sanity in order to make. Today we're going to be talking about the Alpha Jet. This is an aircraft I have played off and on for quite a while and really enjoyed, but while gathering this footage I discovered that Gaijin bugged 30mm HE again in that it doesn't throw shrapnel like it's supposed to currently. As a consequence of this, on my first day of recording, I hit like half a dozen of the best reversals I've ever pulled off while playing this game, and every last one of them either sparked or just did superficial damage. This may or may not have resulted in me rage quitting, deleting all my footage out of frustration, and delaying the video. Luckily, I was able to resolve this reoccurring issue by loading the centerline gun pod with ground target belts, which seemed to get this a little bit closer to just instantaneously detonating enemies the way I was accustomed to it doing in the past. In any case, the Alpha Jet is one of those aircraft which just has this very unique sort of feel to flying, and as a result, if you play this thing after flying out all the other vehicles around it in its various tech trees, you could be forgiven for thinking it's just kinda bad. Before I explain why that isn't the case, I'll quickly go over the different variants we currently have in game. These are the A, the E, and the TH versions. All of these are mostly the same, with the main differences being that the E switches the 27mm cannon for a 30mm DEFA, loses its countermeasures, and gains the ability to carry gun pods. The TH, meanwhile, is basically identical to the A, except it can carry up to 4 all-aspect AIM-9 P4 missiles, moved up to a BR of 10.7. I have played it, and it isn't quite as bad as you'd think, but it's definitely more of a novelty than anything else. Anyways, getting back to the drawbacks of the Alpha Jet, the first issue is energy retention. If you fly into a furball and start turning all over the place, you are going to run out of energy very quickly and will basically just be begging to get third-partied. The other issue is that its gun is mounted very low on the fuselage, which can be disorienting and takes quite a while to get used to. Notably, this is substantial enough to be able to actually throw off your aim pretty badly even while rolling. This gets into the reason why you'll mostly be seeing me use the E in the background gameplay. While the E's 30mm cannons have about 20% less velocity than the 27 on the other variants, they tend to hit a lot harder, give you a lot more trigger time, and when running all 3 cannon pods, give you a much better spread of fire. To be clear, the advice I share in this video will apply to all Alpha Jet variants, but the E is the only one you can really expect to be getting any high kill games with, even though theoretically the A would be better in a 1v1 if you were running it clean against an E with 3 gun pods. So I know I just kind of ripped into this aircraft quite a bit, but let's get into what makes the Alpha Jet good. First off, maneuverability. While it's no vampire, at high speed especially, the Alpha Jet can whip its nose around very quickly. Also, it doesn't have combat flaps, but its takeoff flaps generate a ton of lift and are very useful for helping maneuver at near stall speeds. And speaking of which, low speed controllability is something else this thing does notably well. It kind of reminds me of a baby Mirage 2000 in that the Alpha Jet is capable of remaining controllable even below like 200 miles per hour, speeds at which many of its competitors will just turn into bricks. It also has a very good roll rate even with the gun pods attached. Lastly, the Alpha Jet has extremely good climb rate and vertical energy retention compared to many of the other subsonics around this BR. Not only will this allow you to gain very good positioning early on in the match, but it will also allow you to zoom climb up at enemies who assume you don't have the energy necessary to catch them in the vertical. So, with all that being said, what's the best way to play this thing? Well, the first thing I want to reiterate is that the Alpha Jet is not a vehicle that does well in furballs. If at all possible, you want to try your best not to get sucked into a turn fight early on in the match. Basically, your rule of thumb should be that you want your energy state to correspond to the number of surviving enemy aircraft. If there are a lot of enemies left, maintain your speed and altitude if at all possible. So starting off, I like to climb at 10 degrees right off the airfield and then climb off to the left side of the map. This doesn't need to be exact, but the main idea is that you want to get above and behind the enemy team and then circle back into the middle. This will give you the opportunity to use surprise boom and zoom tactics to whittle down the enemy team's numbers before you potentially need to worry about slowing down and getting sucked into any 1v1 dogfights. At times, you may even catch space climbers who aren't paying attention and aren't really expecting anyone from your team to be able to reach them so early on, let alone a subsonic like the Alpha Jet. Once you've picked off any convenient targets either straggling in the back or not paying attention up high, you can start working your way down. Inevitably, you're going to have a lot of noobs on your team who didn't climb and are getting boom and zoomed, and quite often I find they make for the perfect bait. If you're able to catch the enemy boom and zoomers right at the top of their climb as they're attacking your teammates, they make for extremely easy targets, and given that it's usually these types of players who actually have some idea of what they're doing, you'll also be removing some of the biggest threats to your team early on. If you manage to reach this point where most of the enemy team has been wiped out, at this point you can kind of stop worrying so much about your energy discipline. If you do manage to catch an enemy in a high energy state, the Alpha Jet is extremely well suited to pulling off reversals. I have a full guide on this tactic, which I'll link in the end screen, so I won't rehash all this here, but suffice to say, the characteristics of this airframe, such as its great roll rate, low speed handling, and high speed maneuverability, make it extremely well suited for pulling these off. So if you're trying to get better at doing this, this is a great airframe for that. As you've also probably noticed from the background footage, this is a great jet for pulling off head-ons too, since the E's 3 30mm cannons put up a very good spread of fire, but even the single 27 on the A and TH is quite good for this, due to its high velocity and the great penetrating damage of its SAP and APHE rounds. Follow my shorts feed if you want to see a few examples of that in the near future. Anyways guys, that's the Alpha Jet. Give it a whirl. I think it's quite underrated, but let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out more similar content linked in the playlist in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.